if we deliver anything, even the 3-point difference, it'll be transformational for ALS patients. Because that means that we're significantly slowing down the disease, which means we're significantly slowing down the quality of life decline, and therefore, by extrapolation, we will significantly enhance their survival. And it gets closer to stopping the progression of disease. That just completely changes the life. Increasingly, now, and this is no more a hypothesis, people have extensive publications that now show the direct role of the immune system in neurodegenerative diseases. Inflammation is what drives the progression of these diseases. Restoring the homeostasis or bringing the immune system to balance is the key to stopping the progression of these diseases.
Arun, good morning and welcome to the show. How are you today?
I'm doing great, Chris, and thank you for having me on the show.
Yeah, I was excited to learn more. I know the neurology space is white hot right now, and I'm looking forward to getting into the conversation. First, just stepping back, Arun, I'm surprised. I thought, looking in your background, I thought maybe we might have crossed paths at some point in our past. I see you've had a long career at BMS in various commercial roles, so I thought maybe tell me a little bit about your career and what moments helped shape you to be the leader you are today at Coya Therapeutics.
Yeah, no, thank you, Chris. I think obviously moments that shape you are a continuous process, but there are 2 or 3 points, I think, that really were inflection points or points that shaped me. First is just going back to my being a pharmacist and working and doing my PhD at UPMC and spending time and getting exposure to transplant patients. So it kind of, grounded me on the value of what we do as an industry and how we can transform the lives of families and patients. So that may be the first inflection point that told me that I want to bring good science and make it successful, right? That I think that's where I picked up that DNA that I want to be in that intersection of science and making it real and bringing it to the patients. BMS, multiple inflection points. I think the biggest personal decision I made at BMS that has impacted my career is to say, I want to do a lot of different things at BMS. And a company like BMS allows you to do that because I want to learn how the industry works, not just my core function. I really want to know how do drugs, what does it take? What all does it take to get a drug to the market and to the patients? So that was a key learning and inflection at BMS. Big inflection point, I would say, is when I brought all that together and said, now I want to do something entrepreneurial, and founded a company, which has then led me to my current last 10, 11 years of journey, creating value for smaller companies and really taking great science and doing my part in trying to advance them to the next steps and closer to the patient. So that I think summarizes my career, and each one of those steps has been critical in my growth and in helping me get to where I am. I'm still learning, right? We're all still learning. So
it's been impressive, and I love how you're having that focus on the patient and your company. Let's dive right into sort of your mission and where you're focused. I know that you're looking at indications like ALS and dementia, areas with huge unmet need. Tell us a little bit about the mission and who the patients you're trying to help.
Yeah, our vision, Chris, is if we can make diseases like ALS, frontotemporal dementia, and I'm just using those 2 as an example, and other neurodegenerative diseases, if we can make them diseases that patients can more or less live a normal life with, that's kind of our dream, right? Obviously, many steps to go before we realize that dream. We do believe our science holds promise, and that's what we can do at this point, is to follow that promise and hope to generate the data that will support it. Simply put, today these patients deteriorate in quality of life very rapidly after diagnosis, whether it's ALS, whether it's FTD, and their lifespans are amazingly, disappointingly shortened, right? What we want to do is to just shift all of that as much to the right as possible, meaning their quality of life does not decline, and by extrapolation, then their survival will also increase. And that's kind of what we want to do is what maybe, if you take something like breast cancer, 20 years ago, quality of life declined rapidly for these women and their lifespans were pretty short. Today, a disease like breast cancer, in most cases, has become a manageable cancer. It's still not a great option for these patients, but a lot of them tend to lead a full life now. So that's what we want to do for ALS and FTD. We're not necessarily trying to cure them. If we can just slow the progression, if we can just stop the progression, it'll be transformative for the families and patients.
Arun, you and I have been in the industry for a while, and I know we started when new chemotherapies were coming out in standard of care. Then we moved into sort of more targeted therapies and things, and now we're capitalizing on the promise of host-directed therapies in the immune system. So tell me just a little. If you were talking to a family member or a patient out there, somebody with no science background, how would you describe what your company is trying to do?
What I would say to them is, hey, look, your immune system plays a role. You're probably familiar with the immune system from it attacking diseases, but the same immune system can turn on you and attack the nerve cells, which is really what happens in these diseases. And what we are addressing at Coya is how do we restore these to a balance, right? How do we bring them back to a balance? How do we bring this immune system to a balance? And usually something that keeps these things in balance is, there's a break that we call regulatory T cells that act as that balancing, making sure that the immune system is in check. And when these breaks don't work, the immune system gets out of check. And that's what drives these diseases. Very simplistically, Coya is trying to is going to restore these breaks, and the breaks are going to work. When the breaks work, then everything kind of comes back to a calmer state, reducing the progression of these diseases. So what we want to do is stop that inflammation, which is a driver of these diseases. So think of it as a fire. We're going to put the fire out at the source so it doesn't cause damage.
That's a great explanation. And we're going to dive into your product pipeline in a moment. But before we do that, I think you've set the stage nicely about your mission and what the company's trying to do. But let's talk for a moment about the actual role of the immune system in neurological diseases, because I think most of the time I get questions around, or just patients are uncertain around. I mean, they think about the immune system as something that helps them scan for viruses and bacteria and fight off infection. But what's the role of the immune system in neurodegenerative diseases of the brain and nervous system?
Yeah, Chris. So increasingly, now this is no more a hypothesis. People have extensive publications that now show the direct role of the immune system in neurodegenerative diseases as well as autoimmune diseases, right? And the mechanism between autoimmune and neurodegenerative is essentially the same. And also there's an increased understanding now, which used to be theoretical 15, 20 years ago, that inflammation is what drives the progression of these diseases. So that is the fundamental, I think, revelation that people have, that the immune system is a big player in the progression of these diseases, and that restoring the homeostasis or bringing the immune system to balance is the key to stopping the progression of these diseases. So the T cells and other immune systems, T helper cells, they're all there to go and protect the body against foreign threats. But sometimes what happens is when these breaks, called the regulatory T cells, are dysfunctional, they're not working well, there's nothing to check the T cells and T helper cells and other immune systems, and they kind of get out of control and start attacking healthy nerve cells or neurons, which then leads to the progression of these neurodegenerative diseases. So what we are doing is fundamentally focused on restoring the function of the regulatory T cells. We're restoring the breaks, and by fixing the breaks, we're able to make sure that the immune system is checked and is kept in balance and doesn't go attacking healthy nerve cells. So that's kind of in a high level, but that's the immunology we're targeting, is the regulatory T cells, which, by the way, won the Nobel Prize in October for medicine and physiology, the Nobel Prize went to the work around regulatory T cells.
That's a really great setup and explanation of these breaks on the immune system, these regulatory T cells. I think that'll be a new concept for many people, but that was a really good overview. So with that, Arun, tell me now a little bit about where you are in your clinical pipeline and the development of these products to treat different neurodegenerative diseases.
Yeah, our lead product is Coya 302, which is a proprietary combination of a low-dose interleukin-2 and CTLA-4 Ig. Happy to dive into that mechanism. We are currently in a phase 2b study in patients with ALS. We dosed the first patient in December, right before the holidays, and the recruitment and dosing of additional patients is progressing well. And we anticipate a top-line readout from this trial in the first quarter of 2027. So everything's going well. It's a 120-patient, double-blind, randomized study. Obviously, FDA has seen that protocol. It has been cleared. And we're all systems go on that study. So that's our lead indication for Coya 302. Second indication that we plan to pursue, and we recently got the IND clearance from the FDA to initiate clinical programs, phase 2A program there, is in frontotemporal dementia. So these will be two of our primary indications that we pursue. But we also think there's potential in a lot of other indications. But clinically, these are our two lead programs right now.
For those listeners out there who sort of just think of dementia broadly, I mean, how is frontotemporal dementia different from sort of general dementia or cognitive impairment that most of us might be like, that's kind of how I think of it. Is that wrong? Or is this a more narrow population?
It's a different disease. So it has a commonality with Alzheimer's, which is the leading form of dementia, right? Yes, that there is that dementia component to it. There is that component where memory is lost and memory loss that people associate with dementia. Alzheimer's, of course, has both a vascular component as well, but I think a lot of general population confuses Alzheimer's and dementia as being the same thing. Alzheimer is a dementia, but not all dementias are Alzheimer's. And I think that's something that not always everybody understands. Frontotemporal dementia, the key difference is that it actually affects people at a much younger age. The average age of onset of frontotemporal dementia is 50s in the 50s. So it's a disease that affects people earlier. Alzheimer's tends to be a disease of slightly an older demographic. Typically, there are exceptions. There's an early onset Alzheimer's as well. FTD also has a more significant behavioral component to it and a speech component to it. So, FTD can lead to people mixing up words. They're not able to get the words out, even though they know the words. So they present a little differently clinically, and FTD tends to progress faster than Alzheimer's disease. Usually the progression is much faster than in Alzheimer's disease. A lot of times I compare FTD to a burning fire where it's spreading really fast and doing damage pretty rapidly. Alzheimer's to burning embers of coal. I mean, these are very loose analogies, but where the damage is equally devastating, but it happens at a slightly slower rate than FTD. So they are two very distinctly different dementias. But FTD is, by the way, the second most common form of dementia, which is something that a lot of people don't automatically recognize as well.
How are these patients currently treated today, Arun? I'm guessing that there's probably not a lot of very impactful treatments, but tell me I'm wrong.
No, you're right. The FTD has no approved therapies from the FDA. So it's as straightforward as that. There is literally nothing available for these patients. ALS has a couple of products that are FDA approved, Riluzole and Radicava. But despite those therapies, the ALS patients continue to decline at about 1 point a month on the score called ALS-FRS, which is a measure of how well or how poorly a patient's doing. Basically, lower the score, the worse the patient's doing. They decline on the score about 6 points in 6 months, 12 points in 1 year approximately, despite these therapies. And every single point decline is meaningful because 6 points, for example, can be the difference between a patient who's able to be more or less independent and is walking with a cane to being on a wheelchair, right? 12 points can be the difference between being kind of independent and walking with a cane to being on a ventilator. So every point matters. And despite the therapies, the couple of therapies that exist today, these patients' average lifespan is 3 to 5 years for patients with ALS. So both these diseases, ALS and FTD, really have an immense unmet need. So anything we can do to slow down the progression, of course, if you can stop the progression, will be transformation because these patients really have very few options today.
So you mentioned earlier your asset, Coya 302, and you mentioned there's a dual mechanism. Let's dive into a little bit there. Why is that important to approach it sort of in two prongs?
Yeah, Chris, I believe that approach is our key differentiator from what a lot of other people are pursuing in ALS as well as in other diseases. We fundamentally, number one, believe that a combination strategy is the key to addressing neurodegenerative diseases. And this is not just Coya saying this. There's many experts and many experts across the field are recognizing this and are vocalizing this. Similar to oncology, combination therapies is what eventually got cancers under better control than we used to, right? And being able to do these PD-1 combinations and so on is really changing the field of cancer. It's the same. These are complex diseases where once just hitting one downstream target is just not going to cut it. So our approach is a combination approach of a proprietary low-dose interleukin-2 and a CTLA-4 Ig. What this allows us to do is that the low-dose interleukin-2, kind of making it simple here, increases the Treg numbers and function. So it kind of restores the function of the brakes. But what happens in diseases like ALS and frontotemporal dementia is that the macro environment is extremely inflammatory. These are highly inflammatory diseases. So while the Tregs have become functional, in an inflammatory environment, they tend to quickly revert back to being dysfunctional. And we saw this with cell therapy. We started as a cell therapy company. When we take out the dysfunctional Tregs, make them functional, and put them back in the patient, yes, it works. And we had data that shows that it works. But it also stops, and the Tregs become dysfunctional much faster than we want them to. And the reason is that the macro environment still remains inflammatory. You just took them out, you fixed the brakes, but you put the brakes back with in an environment where the oil and everything else surrounding it is still crappy or not in good shape. So that's the secret sauce, is our combination with CTLA-4. What the CTLA-4 Ig does is that it acts on a different aspect of the immune system, acts on CD80, 86, and then manages and keeps the macrophages, activated myeloid cells, and the macro environment less inflammatory. Now we have function. It's a 1-2 punch. Now we've got the Tregs functional through the low-dose IL-2, and now we have a mechanism that keeps the Tregs functional for a durable, sustained period of time, which then starts translating into positive movements in the biomarkers and positive movements in the clinical outcomes as well.
You mentioned the importance of targeting different pathways that contribute to neurodegenerative diseases sort of synergistically. Have you thought about combination strategies with sort of B-cell directed immunotherapies or CAR T-cell therapies? There's many of those that are in development for various autoimmune diseases, but or is it that in neurodegenerative diseases, the T cells are more important than the B cell? I mean, what can you tell us about that?
Well, that is a valid question, Chris. We are looking at the B cell roles as well, and I think there is a potential for combinations there. Now, we as a small company try to stay focused on a couple of things, but we do talk to others with other mechanisms. We do believe Coya 301, which is our proprietary low-dose IL-2, is a perfect molecule for combinations with a lot of different modalities, including other modalities in diseases like Alzheimer's disease, right? We are ourselves pursuing GLP-1 combination, which we call Coya 303, for the same rationale you just mentioned, because these are about finding combinations where they're complementary. Synergistic is great, but it doesn't even have to be synergistic. Additive or complementary mechanisms make sense. So if there's an individual mechanism that has shown potential in any of these diseases, I think combining it with Coya 301 makes a lot of intuitive sense. And we do actively have those conversations with other companies that have those different mechanisms. So not only is your question valid, it is a core part of Coya's strategy, is to look at what other combinations make sense.
Beautiful. Yeah, that makes sense. I just didn't know from a biology perspective if targeting B cells was as relevant in this space. So it looks like that's something that's, you're always thinking about, and it's just different combination strategies, right? So yeah. So this is exciting. So when you talk to clinicians, investigators who are actually treating patients with neurodegenerative diseases, or maybe patient advocates out there's a lot of advocacy groups. What is it that they're most hopeful about when they look at your pipeline and the promise of these new immunotherapies, Arun?
Patients and their families, and these diseases are equally a disease of the family, Chris, right? So patients and their families are very passionate in this space. They probably know more than I do about all the pipeline products that are out there in ALS, to be honest, because this is their life. What they're hopeful about is that the science is advancing. There seems to be a lot of people, including Coya, trying to solve this complicated problem. And there seems to be good progress. For example, even from Coya, there seems to be credible science that supports that the solution may not be too far away in the future. It's not just theoretical, hypothetical, but there are true advances happening. And I think that is what gives a lot of these patients hope. This is an unbelievable patient community that, is very resilient and really believes that, it's a matter of time. We at Coya are, patient is our North Star. I know it sounds cliche to say that, but it is so true at Coya. We have individuals in Coya, and one of them publicly speaks about it, so I'm not sharing anything confidential. He carries the gene. He carries the gene for ALS, the C9orf72 gene. He's had a devastating family history of these diseases, both ALS and FTD. And he is not only a patient advocate himself, he represents Coya with a lot of our patients. So we hear directly from these patient communities on a regular basis, and they remain hopeful. And our job is to stay laser focused on executing so we can get these therapies, assuming, of course, that our data works out, to the patients. And what I control is what Coya can do. But in this space, I like to remind people, sometimes I get the questions, what do you think about your competitors? I go, I hate to call other companies competitors in the ALS and FTD space, because this is too big a problem. Somebody's got to solve this. And I'll be thrilled if it's some other company that solves this problem. And we feel like we're well poised to be among the lead companies to solve this problem. And there's so much room for multiple players in a disease like this. And that's something we hear from patients. We go, hey, we would love to have 5 options for this disease, So, and I think that is what I hear from the patient community.
Arun, when you look ahead to the next 12 months, let's say, what are the important clinical development milestones? I mean, congrats. I know you just received FDA clearance, IND clearance to go into I think FTD just a few weeks ago. But I mean, when can we expect to maybe see a readout on any of the clinical data that for these studies?
Yeah, so we will have data readouts from, we've already reported top line in ALS from a small study, top line in frontotemporal dementia very recently from a 9-patient investigator-initiated study. We have previously reported some top line from Alzheimer's disease patients as well. In 2026, over the next months, you will continue to see updated data, meaning more insights from those studies. So they're not new top-line data of the clinical outcome, but data that hopefully will continue to support our mechanistic story and add scientific validation, whether it's single-cell proteomics data, biomarker, correlation data. So you're going to see a lot of that coming out in 2026. So the foundational scientific type data from us. Of course, in the first quarter of 2027 is going to what we're projecting the big readout, which is a readout from our ongoing phase 2b trial in patients with ALS. We also plan to initiate phase 2a study in frontotemporal dementia patients later this year. And again, that'll be a trial that's going on. And of course, we want to have a clinical readout of it in 2026, but it's all setting up to a 2027 that can be a transformational year for Coya.
Looking a little farther into the future, Arun, when you look at if everything goes to plan and you execute, and I know a lot of this is dependent on clinical trial enrollment times and so forth, but taking that aside, if you execute on the plan and the promise of your products, how do you hope the company will have changed the standard of care in these neurodegenerative diseases?
If we deliver what we hope to, which is to show, for example, in ALS, our study is powered to show a 3-point difference in that score called ALSFRS, which means that, I'm simplifying it, in 6 months, if the average patient declines by 6 points, what we're saying is Coya 302 at a minimum will stop the decline down to 3 points, right? And what we saw in our small investigator-initiated trial is that there was no decline in the ALSFRS. So if we deliver anything, even the 3-point difference as an example, it'll be transformational for ALS patients, because that means that we're significantly slowing down the disease, which means we're significantly slowing down the quality of life decline these patients see. And therefore, by extrapolation, we will significantly enhance their survival as well. So that is what we would bring to the patients that today have none of this is happening through any of the therapies that are available. And of course, on the upside, if we are able to really show even better than 3 points and it gets closer to stopping the progression of disease, that just completely changes the lives of these patients, right? Because now you're talking pretty much achieving our dream, which is that these patients can live a more or less normal life as long as they're on therapy and have potentially a full life. But again, all of that is aspirational at this point. The data will dictate where we fall in that spectrum. But all of the science, all of the data today points to us being successful, meaning that I do feel pretty confident that we will show a meaningful difference between the treatment arm and the non-treatment arms. How big the difference is, all that, of course, we're going to have to wait to see the actual data. But I think that's what it'll mean for patients and families. They now have a therapy that actually makes a meaningful difference in the progression of their disease.
So Arun, maybe just to wrap up the show, maybe one last final question, give you the opportunity, if you were, for someone living with ALS or a caregiver that's taking care of someone with ALS, what message would you have for them today about where your company, where the field is headed in the future?
Field is headed in the right direction, and I think that is the key point I would communicate to the patients and their families. There's a lot of good science advancing, a lot of better understanding of what drives diseases like ALS. For example, what Coya leverages, there's now a clear understanding that Treg dysfunction drives the progression of these diseases. Knowing that is significant because now we kind of know what we need to target to potentially slow the progression of diseases. That's always the most difficult part of diseases, is knowing what is causing them. And in cases like ALS and FTD, that answer is still not clear, but is getting clearer by the day. And as that answer gets clearer, not just Coya, there'll be others that would step in and will eventually find a solution for these patients. I can only talk about Coya because that's what I'm most familiar with, but I'm sure we're not going to be the only ones that are taking advantage of the advances in science. There'll be others. And I really hope that others succeed as well, because these patients need it. And so that's the key message I would tell the patients, is that the science is leading the way. And the science is leading the way where it's a matter of when, not if, there will be therapies that come to the market that significantly help these patients.
Well, this has been amazing. I'll be following very closely, Arun. I mean, I know patients should be following Coya Therapeutics. You know, the promise here. I love the science and harnessing the immune system to help overcome these devastating neurodegenerative diseases. So, thank you for joining the show today, Arun, and we'll be following you and cheering you on.
Thank you, Chris. I really appreciated the opportunity to be on and talk to you. I really enjoyed the conversation. Thank you, and look forward to you following the Coya story, and hopefully we'll have some positive things to disclose along the way.
Sure, maybe we can check in again at the end of the year. So best
Sounds
of luck.
Good. Yeah. Thank you.
So that brings us to the end of today's episode. If you enjoyed this conversation, be sure to follow RX for Biotech on your favorite podcasting streaming platform, and subscribe on our YouTube channel to listen to more episodes just like this. And finally, if you or someone you know has just received a difficult diagnosis, especially a cancer diagnosis, we know that it can be overwhelming. And you hear the words, you hear the diagnosis, but you're left with lots of questions. Well, therapyforme.ai helps you do the journey, helps you take that next step. It helps empower you with the right information to know what questions to ask your providers to help you find a specialist near you that can help. There's no long waits, no guesswork, just clearer answers and a path forward. If you're looking for care, alternative treatment options, or just to find a specialist, or just need to be connected to a nurse navigator who can help answer some of your questions, start at therapyforme.ai. Thanks for listening.